Yes, so in this session we have a panel of three scientists. Fortunately, will make a conversation easier because they all come from a health-related disciplines. However, they also come from different parts of the world, so we're going to have a really quite interesting perspectives. So we have Professor An-Najah Martinez Abarca. So she's a professor at University of Americas in Ecuador, and she's also chair of bioethics in the human medicine career. So I think that's a very important thing because although more women now enter medical school, certainly in Europe than men, I think that there are all sorts of perspectives emerged when people think that it's actually a bad thing that there are too many women in medicine. Anyway, she also worked in the Ministry of Public Health in Ecuador and specializes in maternal health and reproductive health, and also as well gender and human rights approach to medical education. So that sounds really quite interesting, fantastic, and I really want to hear what you will say. Our second panelist is Edna Patricia Matta-Camacho. Her specialization is therapeutic products, and she works in Canada for Health Canada, because Canada is really leading the world in areas of how to actually deal with sex and gender issues in science, and also all this additional intersectionality things. I think that is really the effort that has been done in Canada. Canada has been really fantastic. And our last panelist is Amira Shaheen. She's from Palestine, so this is really wonderful to have you here. Her research interests are focused on mental health and women's health, child health, injuries, and environmental health. Well, there's a lot to say there in relation to this, what in Europe is described as a gender dimension of research. Yes. So, and I think this is very timely because to consider the gender and sex aspects in relation to health research and health care and health well-being, because we have climate change, and we know that women are affected by climate change in different ways to men. And we have also the COVID epidemic, pandemic, that we have now learning not only about the importance and consequences for women and for men, but also in relation to different geographies and health systems, and the fact that most of the health workers are women. And so there's all sorts of very interesting issues are coming out. And I think the story really needs a lot of attention and be really well understood, because we cannot understand and be ready for future pandemics or even epidemics if we're just relying on epidemiology. Yes, we really need to understand the social and economic impact of diseases such as that one. So I would also like to mention here, because we're talking about science, so there's the Lancet countdown in trying to monitor the impact of climate change on health. This is like a huge program of investigation, and obviously led by the Lancet, many scientists from around the world contributing to it. They have developed some 44 indicators to measure this impact on health. And as we know, sex and gender differences in health are really pretty well known. There's a huge amount of evidence on it. And yet there was not one gender indicator among this 44 that dealt with this to measuring impact on health of climate change on health. But after it was pointed out to the Lancet that this is really big gap, they have suddenly found a way to include gender indicators among these 44. So it's a really hopeful thing that it is possible to direct the production of knowledge in the right way if you raise awareness of the scientists that they really cannot ignore the fact that there are these differences, the biological differences, and there are social differences and cultural differences, etc., that make health. You really have to sometimes consider health for women differently than for men. So you have 5 minutes each. We start with Lucía. About 5 minutes for your perspective on this issue of importance of diversity in health.
Well, thank you so much. Good day to everybody. For me, it's such a great honor to be in company with you today. And well, my research as a doctor, but also as a gender specialist, points towards gender mainstreaming in medical sciences and gender mainstreaming in medical investigation. So I would say that having heard all the debate that went before us, it's quite interesting how much we have advanced in this issue, but yet how long we have to go. So in Latin America specifically, gender issues are yet to be a lot more important in public policies and education. A few minutes ago, you asked about women in medical careers, and actually, we just graduated another group of young physicians, and I would say that the percentage of women was maybe a little bit more than 50 to 60% of all the medical students right now. But unfortunately, that amount of women does not guarantee a gender view or gender perspective, as you might well know. So, investigations in health, specifically in health sciences, are trying to incorporate gender view and gender perspectives. And we are still debating. Recently, about 2 weeks ago, the Bioethics Committee asked me to give a lecture about the importance of this separation between gender and sex in having this discussion in the bioethics field. So right now, we are having a very productive discussion and debates around feminist bioethics and environmental bioethics, which also, as you know, have this huge gender bias that it's been a lot more profound since the COVID pandemic. So right now, in investigation, we are trying to prove that this difference between gender and sex in studies and in gender studies actually have to be a lot more considered in for example academic curricula. So right now in my faculty, in my university, we are to gain or to accomplish the gender mainstreaming in medical sciences. Actually, that is my PhD research. But as some of the guests were saying in the comments, it's very frustrating because it's not yet recognized, it's not yet taken into consideration as how important it should be. Because as you know, gender studies have brought into public opinion the intersectionality focus. So right now we are still trying. It's quite frustrating because as hard as it is to be a woman in science, it's harder to try to put the gender view in a very male-dominated field.
Right. Thank you very much for that. Indeed, I think there is always a lot of opposition, mainly from ignorance, really, and not really willing to accept it. That's why I feel that coming up with a sort of empirical evidence is the only way to persuade this kind of a set in their way of male scientists and policymakers. But I think in health we have much more evidence in health than any other area. Yeah. And but maybe still the lives of women are not valued in the same way that the lives of men. And I think that might also affect the decision making. Yes. And I think women have to be more educated about their own health and to not really completely rely on on one opinion. I think they really have to understand their bodies, yes, and know how to look after themselves. Thank you so much for this very interesting introduction, especially the reference to bioethics. I think that's a really good perspective to have, the sort of a sex and gender. How does it relate to bioethics? So can I have now invite Edna Patricia to give have 5 minutes introduction.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, OWSD, for this excellent opportunity to talk about why sex and gender-based analysis is a critical component for excellence in science and human health. I would like to state that my opinions expressed today are not representing my organization, but so yes, as Elizabeth mentioned before, Canada is leading, Health Canada is leading some of the action plans to include sex and gender-based analysis into our practices. And actually, I'm very lucky. I just joined Health Canada last year, and I got into all these building capacity and gaining knowledge in this very important topic, because we see how, and actually with the pandemic, we see how men and women and different populations are affected in a different manner, how the diseases and how the procedures that we establish can have different effects in the populations, how the economics and the social status can affect the outcomes, and it has been well established and studied now. So here in Health Canada, there is this sex and gender action plan. I'm working as the division representative of my department, and we are working in the reproduction part, which is working specifically with the contraceptives. And in this part, we are having in considerations, for instance, these are products that are for female, because they are contraceptive designed for women. So in that case, we need to have these SGBA lenses focused to that the representation and the participation of different demographics, the diversity and inclusion of the studies that are presented to us to be able to assess safety and efficacy are rigorous, are well established, and it's going to give us a good understanding to be able to assess how safe or secure are certain drugs for the human population. So these topics definitely are increasing. There is more and more information that led us to understand and to gain further understanding how sex and gender considerations, sex being as a biological component and the gender considerations being more of the social context of the populations, may affect how we establish regulation, how we develop policies to be able to include this knowledge and this understanding among our researchers and our community. And this is an integral process. We are here as in the evaluation part or the evaluation phase, but as well, it has to be integrated in the development part, where the scientists and all the funding agencies and institutions have to commit to be able to integrate these sex and gender-based analysis into the research, into how they design the studies, how they design clinical trials, how they decide what projects have to be granted. And so this is an important component, because when we go to the evaluation phase, we already have that information, and we can assess with the rigorosity that this process requires. So I'm very happy, I'm very grateful for this space in this conference where we can both knowledge and challenge the level of commitment and effort put into addressing, as Angela Saini mentioned earlier, the long-standing gaps and the application of sex and gender-based analysis in science, research, public health health policy, programs, and interventions. And I'm very much looking forward to sharing my experience, and listening and learning as well from my colleagues. Thank you.
Very much, Edna, very much, very interesting. We have worked with the research foundation funders in Canada about 3 or 4 years ago on a gender summit that was hosted in Montreal. and I'm hopeful that we might actually have one next year in Canada. So because I'm really so recognize the influence that actually the efforts in Canada have had on the rest of the world, including on the European Union. It's because my friend Kara Tannenbaum, I know her really well, and she's a kind of a leading light in this efforts. Okay, now I would like to invite Amira to give us 5 minutes introduction into her her role and her work.
Okay, merhaba, hello, ciao, hola, to you, Elizabeth, to the respected panelists, and to the audience. It's a great honor for me to be with you today and now discussing this important topic. I'd like to say that now I'm principal investigator in a research that aims at enhancing the healthcare response to gender-based violence. Prior to do a training for healthcare provider at identification and referral of survivors or of women who are exposed to violence, we usually assess their views around certain issues. One of these issues is the gender norm. And you'll be very surprised in a patriarchal community and environment, what kind of responses we are getting. Whenever I hear these responses, I usually start thinking, are these health providers, are they going to respond, and are they going to intake the training and be more cooperative and start to identify women? And this actually keep on getting to my mind whenever I interview the providers. So hopefully soon we'll get an answer for these thoughts that I usually got while interviewing them, as we are going to have a paper around this issue. Actually, when I graduated as a scientist. I'm a chemist. And 20 years ago, when I was in my school, in my undergraduate school, I usually look around me, all the professors are males in chemistry. I never, all who are taught me, they're males. I usually was thinking, why males? Why not females? Why don't have females teaching me chemistry? And to be honest with you, after 20 years, we still have the same issue. I mean, here, in the Middle East, I don't think that gender issues are taken seriously. And there is a lot of work to be done in order to start having these issues in. Thanks. This is what I want to introduce.
Oh, I'm silent. No, I'm not silent anymore. Thank you very much indeed, Amira. Yes, I mean, so many different complicated aspects to it, and especially what happens in the different countries for women, what stops really or prevents women to enter science and succeed in science in all the fields. But is in your country, I mean, there are in a medical school, what is the proportion of women? I mean, is there a lot more women than men entering medical school?
Yeah, there are lots of women who are studying medicine, yet in terms of promotion and all these things, males are predominant on females, as in the rest of the world, actually.
Okay, so shall we have my other panelists in the room now? Hello, everybody, again. Very nice. Okay, so I think we should have a little discussion now. My first question was going to be, what can be done to promote the adoption of methods of sex-gender analysis by researchers? And maybe, Edna, you would be the very good person to start this, because you can share some best practice from Canada.
Yes, thank you. So as a reviewer, which is my job in Health Canada, during the decision-making process, we consider Canada's general population when we are assessing and managing the health risk associated with prescription drugs. However, our resources, and as I mentioned in my introduction, for specific files are limited to what the researchers made or the studies that are submitted by the sponsor, which is the person that gives us the file for the drug. So in this context, we see that there are several instances when we can take into consideration that we need to have a 2020 lens or 2020 vision in this matter. For instance, what are the regulations that we here Canada have in place that make these researchers and sponsors to comply with the sex and gender analysis? So we, during our evaluation, can assess safety and efficacy with the appropriate rigor, ranging from participation and inclusion and of diverse population in their studies. So this is in the evaluation part. So this is what we have been evaluating, taking in considerations all the increasing information. We are gathering experts and getting more on the ways of the strategies, how we can apply the SGBA lenses into our daily practices, into developing process, policies, regulations, and mandates that guide our sponsors and the scientists to comply with this inclusion of these important concepts in the science. So in the developmental phase, it requires, like as I mentioned, the scientific community to commit not only to include sex and gender as an add-on, like I'm going to have female rats and male rats in the experiment and I did it, or I include sex and gender-based analysis in the grant and that's my contribution. No, there has to be a commitment and a deeply understanding on how sex and gender considerations in data analysis help to understand the biology and how the biology and the social components of for every individual can affect the response to a given treatment, to the exposure or toxic substances, or a disease, or the outcomes, why these outcomes are different, what is this in the intrinsic biology or in the social culture, in the context that affects these specific outcomes. Because fragmented evidence can render into individual needs invisible, such as historically has been happening. So, like Angela mentioned, has been happening for women that has been excluded from health and medical research, education, and professional. So these factors have been taken in consideration, has to be taken in consideration again, not as an add-on, but as a rigor of how science has to be developed, how science has to be done and designed to provide quality data and understanding to inform healthcare decisions. So luckily, in Health Canada, we have been a great focus and efforts across knowledge production system, the system community, and the funding agencies at the federal level. I am part of the sex and gender-based analysis plan on my division, and I have witnessed the leading efforts to strengthen the integration of sex, gender, and diversity considerations across the agency, developing the relevant tools to apply the SGBA lenses to our practices. So, in conclusion, or what I think it is important now is that we transition from this reactive form that, for instance, we live in the COVID-19 pandemic that we saw how people in it was affected in a differential manner. So and now we start looking to understand what was happening. This experience has to be an example for now to be proactive, to be able to develop analytical process to understand how women, men, boys, girls, and gender diverse people are differentially impacted to be able to mitigate the risk and the effect in the most susceptible population. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. So is this available on any website? Can you put in our into the chat, maybe where people can find this information? Because it sounds to be such a systemic approach. It would be a very good example of a good practice for other countries. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So maybe I will ask now Anna Lucia, because you mentioned curriculum and you mentioned, and I think this is the researcher training. It's one thing to oblige researchers to include sex and gender analysis, and there are tools emerging to show what it means. But I find a lot of people don't really struggle with understanding what it means. And I think this awareness and this researcher training has to start really very early on, and maybe even at the undergraduate level. So we need to change the textbooks. We need to make them less biased towards using men as the models. So do you think it's a possibility in Latin America to do this? Because a lot of this knowledge comes from the English-speaking countries, or even maybe French, yes? We just had a gender summit Latin America, okay, last month. And we had to employ translators or interpreters, because I felt that really to talk about this issue in your own language is so much better than trying to translate it in your head what it actually you want to say. So I think Latin America, Spanish and Portuguese speaking countries, I think we need to really know much more about what is happening there, because we understand Canada, United States and Europe, but this knowledge that has to be produced in different languages, it's less known or less available, and but are equally important. So maybe you have some ideas about that.
Yes, for sure. Here in Latin America, we're still struggling with having feminism as a political force that's still gaining some ground still. So, as you know, Latin America always takes a little bit longer than Europe or North America to gain these spaces. So, still we're struggling with that, as you might as well have seen it in the last summit. But that is not such a bad thing in all of it. Here in Latin America, feminism and feminist groups are trying to put into the ground and to make the gender agenda a little bit more empowered than other things. And COVID-19 has helped that a lot in many ways. So, for instance, in medical education and in undergraduate education, gender is becoming one of the main aspects to talk about. Still, we are struggling because, as you just said, medicine is one of the male-dominated forces and careers that we have, and it's quite challenging to see that many women aspire to have men positions, not to create our own spaces, but to take the men's spaces. So when a few minutes ago, someone was asking about the role of the man role in all these gender issues, I think that for women, it's always been about negotiating spaces, negotiating with power, with hierarchy. And that's always one of the main challenges that sets us back into the career of gaining or to achieving gender mainstreaming. And also, when we talk about other diversities such as intersex or bisexual or trans women or trans men, there's always this discussion of where that leaves women, cis women. And in sciences, we are trying to get women to be a part of the academia or the science. I don't know, media, if you say so. Still, we have some inner issues that we have to discuss, such as which is going to be the role of men. as you were saying, and sometimes we have to ask for permission and to have this recognition of this recognition from men or from our peers. And for women, it has become some sort of masculinization of the gender agenda. So here in Latin America, we still have the patriarchy very, very strong, and including in women points of view and women thinking and the way that women do research. Still, you find a lot of women involved in sciences, but as second or third authors when they are the ones that are doing all the research. So as you were saying, we have to change it from the root. Changing the books, the medicine books are all based on male anatomy, and the way that we think about medicine, we end up thinking about medicine for men, and for women we just leave it in my field exclusively, that is sexual and reproductive health. And that leaves also another gender issue, that is where is the focus on men's health from a gender point of view, which is completely different, completely new, and totally groundbreaking.
Okay. Correct. I think it's one way to actually bring men into the discussion of gender issues in health, is to show them that actually it is as important for them to understand these differences. Osteoporosis, but it was assumed men don't suffer from it. And nearly everything we know about breast cancer is based on women. So I think if one can point, and men are more susceptible to cancers than women. So there's a lot of evidence that one could say to men, this is as important for you to be engaged in this as it is for women. And there are certain things, certainly in Europe, this is a sort of the emerging field of gender medicine. So it's not just women's health, it is health of everybody really taken. So I think there is some examples now of good practices emerging, but at the same time, the textbooks are still very much in an old model. I'm just trying to remember, I just read it very recently, maybe like 1 or 2 days ago, that I think Elsevier is going to produce a book of anatomy that is based on a female body. So
yeah, it would be amazing to have it. There's a lot of books that have been published in Spain, and I believe that in Denmark or Deutschland, I don't remember exactly the country, or the United Kingdom even, when it's a gender medicine, but still it's not a scientific structure as you might see in an anatomy book or in a physiology book or in a physicist book. So it's different. It's more of a narrative or maybe like a novel thing. So it's different as how is it that when a woman tries to publish scientist books, it's always driven towards the what we call in ethic the ethics of care. So it's a different speech, it's a different language, it's not a scientific structure or what we think as a structure in science should be.
Very interesting. Amira, what's the perspective from Palestine?
Thanks. Well, actually, it's not that different from what Anna is said. I should say that we do have gender studies, but these usually belong to humanity department. It's nothing to deal with medicine or even healthcare studies. And there's something else. 2 days ago, I posted this question at the Facebook, and it struck me the responses. Like in Urbanistines, as Edna said, many funders ask the researchers to adjust the gender. And what's happened is that they having it as a sex, asking about the sex, so they do sex analysis and reporting it as a gender, which is different. So I believe, yeah, in Palestine we still like struggle in between sex and gender.
Right. This is a really very important comment, because how people find literature on sex and gender, this really depends how they formulate the search query. If they say searching scopus to find studies to support their research, yes, and if the authors then use gender but mean sex, or use sex but mean gender, that of course is going to affect things. So my second question was about who are the major actors in trying to advance this knowledge production that is sensitive to sex, gender, and diversity aspects. Yes, because we have the research performing organization, universities and institutes. We have the research funders. Obviously, they have potentially a lot of power because money talks. And then we have the publishers, and I think in between them, they could agree what it means to ask as a editor of a journal. You say we're only going to accept papers if you have answered the question about was sex and gender or diversity issues relevant, and you have your methodology on this. So like a lot of journals now, maybe 200 or so, have a policy on saying that they're considering sex and gender in research. However, then you have to look at the reviewers, yes, and the authors, and who actually makes the decision. They take a lot of people to train on what it means, and the only way that people will have the same understanding is if the universities and research funders and research publishers use the same guidelines. Yes. So in Europe, there are the SAGER guidelines, SAGER. They have been developed over a period of, I think, 2 or 3 years. They are now kind of like a standard for journals to use when to advise the authors, how to address this question. And so I think we're moving in the right direction. There is all these good practices are emerging. But I think without the researchers for me, I think there is a fast track, okay, to achieving changes. The funders say, we're going to require you when you're applying for funding to explain, how sex and gender relates to what you want to do. And the research publishers say, if you want to publish your research, you have to explain this. Yeah. The researchers sit in the middle and will respond. Yes? But they have to be trained, yes? And I mean women and men researchers. Because if women and men researchers are trained on biased knowledge, biased evidence, they by themselves not going to discover that there's a bias. This bias has to be, from our experience, this bias has to be explained to them. Yeah? Because everybody thinks excellent science was published in Nature, can't doubt anything about it, but you can and you should, and so on. So we know in Canada there is quite a lot of force driven by the research funders, but is there any response from the science journals and editorial policies and kind of a teaching of the reviewers when they are assessing research, whether for the quality, whether that's what they should be looking for?
Yes, actually, as you were speaking, I recall that the CIHR agency, which is one of the agencies here that provides funding for research, they have this tool when the researchers want to submit for a grant, they have to check if they have include sex and gender-based analysis in their studies, but not only check, but to explain how and what was the rigorous that was following their studies. And I think that this is very important because I think that, as I mentioned before, it's not just to add the terminology there. It's just to be responsible, to have accountability, to include this analysis, to have disaggregated the data, or at least to have, because when you are proposing a project, at least you have to have the vision that you're going to collect this data and you're going to disaggregate it and you're going to try to understand the phenomenon that is happening and the differences that you are observing. And here in Health Canada, what the organization is doing is preparing, gathering experts, and of course preparing presentations to educate people, so we can, as you mentioned, we can get uniform terminology. We know what we are talking about. We know what we are looking into the research, into the studies that have been provided to us for the assessment of safety and efficacy. So we are able to apply these lenses, these sex and gender-based analysis into the results that are representing and supporting the efficacy and the safety for the drugs. So we have been, and it has been a great effort. I can see it is in the news, is in the seminars, is in our daily practices, that we receive this building capacity on what to look, what to expect, where to find. If we have areas where we can improve, where we can report it, to say that we can improve our regulations, we can improve our mandates. So all these community engagement with the policymakers in the agency, with reviewers, with quality revisers, people that is doing the quality revisions too, we all together get to input what are the areas that require further to be addressed. If we need to be, our new reviewers need to be educated in different terminologies. So all this is important. This interaction and this dynamic in an institution, I think that is very important to form a consistent way to address this important issue in health policy.
Thank you very much. So there's a question to Anna, Lucía, and Amira, because we're talking here English-speaking language, where those concepts have been around for quite a long time. I would want to know how easy translatable they are, or do we have to kind of have a special understanding, so we can't talk about it the way we talk in the European Union about gender dimensions and things, because people say, what is gender dimension? But we kind of accept, we know what it is. But so we need to find a way to have a common language, even in a different language.
First of all, I think that you were asking at the beginning where were the main actors towards gender mainstreaming as we know it. I think that the most important actors are the researchers. First, we have to understand that we have this breach between statistical or epidemiological research versus the qualitative researches. And always gender is more like placed in that kind of research. So as you know, social sciences have taken over the gender studies, but to have to place them in the other as a hard science, as we know it here in Latin America, is one of the main challenges. To change that point of view or that way of thinking or the structure of the investigation is one of the main challenges. And for that, as you were saying, men and women have to be trained in gender, because otherwise it's like mixing a cake. You just add women and mix, and there you go, you have gender mainstreaming. And in the other thing that I was thinking about is that, first of all, we need to eliminate the other issues that affect women in science, as they were asking in the comments recently. What do we do about harassment? What do we do about violence in science? Then we have, when you have some researchers, some female researchers that are gaining a place or having a stronger voice than men, then for some reason power becomes a very important issue that overcomes whatever accomplishment that we are having in academics or in sciences. So as long as we have to face those issues in the meantime, while we are investigating, we are always disadvantages in front of men, because for them, violence is not an issue. Sexual harassment is not an issue. The fact that how can you be beautiful and smart at the same time, or how is it that you talk or have gained some power or decision-making space in your organization is questioned just because the fact you are a woman. So before, I think that, or not before, I think maybe in the same time or at the same time that we are dealing with these issues, we have not eradicated violence towards women. And academia is one of the other places or fields that we are still being violenced and normalizing that violence, because we are believing what it was said before, that we are inferior to men, and we are trying to prove that we are not. So I think that is the main issue that we have to understand, that for us, still a lot of issues to overcome, even beyond the fact that we are capable, that we can do it, we have to prove it. And as long as that issue is not yet overcome, then I think we have many things to accomplish. And this happens in Europe, Latin America. Maybe in Latin America, we're taking a little bit more time than in Europe, but it's happening in Europe as well. For example, what happened with Angela Merkel. Everybody was questioning her because she was not feminine enough to be as effective as a prime minister in Germany. So for us here is just as the same. And about the translation in the language, I think that gender, as in género, as we know it here, or as in transversalización, which is mainstreaming, are very, very powerful words, either in English or in Spanish. We maybe have a little bit more of a feminist take over there, but still it's total, it's completely something impossible that we can do here. So I don't think language is an issue. Maybe culture, but not so much.
Actually, I'll start from Anna, or from where Anna is ended. If we want to clarify this issue, we need to go to the root. And I believe that culture play a real struggle around, like here in Palestine, culture play a real, and even in the Middle East, play a real obstacle for looking at gender and having it as a question within the within research. And to be honest with you, here, from what I'm reviewing from applications, most of the applications are asking about sex. They don't ask about gender. And the only application that I recall asking about gender, and comes around like mostly gender norms and gender the rule of women in the community, is the research that we are doing on gender-based violence, which is like, the topic guides coming from the UK. So, like, yeah, still we do have struggles and asking about gender, and even like people here, they are not taking it easy. And even if the textbook box that you are talking about, that will be based on like a female body, I don't think the culture here will accept it. They accept the male body, but they don't even like here still, by the way, sexual education is not, I mean, in some schools, they like skip the chapter when it's come to discuss the anatomy of the body, mainly the reproductive system.
Muted. Okay. I need to get some questions from a chat. Okay. There have been some talk about commercialization of gender in research proposal, that is somehow I'm not sure that I really understand. It's not about box ticking anymore, and certainly not in Europe. It is really about quality of research, about quality of evidence. So that's not really commercialization. It's been certainly recognized now in the European Commission that you have to, that even the Commission's own employees who look after programs and the evaluators of the proposals have to be trained what it means. So it's really like a huge awareness raising and education program that is now taking place. It's not simple for people to understand these things. Then there was also about violence. It's not just violence of men against women, but also men also experience violence from women. That's true, but is certainly not as critical as the other way around. And of course, we have to think about boy soldiers in Africa. You know, that's violence against them. So the context is also quite important. And certainly COVID-19 have produced much more evidence of the violence against women within a home and so on. So this is all complicated. Comment from Olfa Marjou. When a woman, especially a mother, is participating in a project, do we care about the time she's dedicating to the project versus her own life and family duties? Wow, you know, that's exactly what is happening when you're looking at the leaky pipeline. At the very critical, especially in life sciences, at the critical times when you have to be in the laboratory, women have less time to spend on research because they spend much more time on the other things, not only at home, because they also are expected to do kind of a caring tasks within universities. So they're not on a financial decision-making committees. They are sort of a way you spend time with students much more than within decisions. And you can trace this all the way. It's this time to write research papers. It's time to network with people. It's time to go to conferences. All this adds up and shows that at the end, that's why, you know, there's this persistent imbalance between the number of professors who are men and number of professors that are women. It is impossible by any account that, let's say, in Europe, 76% of professors are men and 24 are women. And that's after 20 years of increase from 80% and 20%. It is just impossible that all those men are as clever as the 20% of the women. It's just there's no theory that could explain that other than all this kind of at each step of the career progression, there are different issues that arise. But all of them, if you want to be a really good researcher, you're expected to publish at least 4 research papers in a year. Well, that takes a lot of time, yes? And if you are being expected to also do much more teaching, yes, and also your role at home, that is really puts much more pressure on women. So we really have to change how merit is assessed and valued. You cannot expect women in a childbearing period to be productive in the way that they can be before or after. And so the CVs now, frequently people say, just list 4 most important papers. We don't want to know that you have written 120 papers. So I think we're about coming to an end. Yes. All right. The final statements to our audience from each one of you to encourage. There should be at least the audience of 1,000 women scientists in the developing world. I think we need to send them some messages of encouragement, and so at least definitely that they would want to continue in their career that they have chosen. So Amira, you start.
I believe that no matter of all these disadvantage and struggles that women are facing, they are smart and they can carry on with doing their research and be lead in their research regardless of what struggles they are facing. But I have something to add, if you allow me, Elizabeth. You know, like universities, usually they do have a rank. And I believe the rank from now on should be based on their implementation of gender policies. And this should be very important. Unless we are not doing this, we will just keep talking about like gender inequality. So we need, like, for any funder, in order to give a grant for any like research institution or universities, they need to look at and assess the look for an assessment of gender policies in these institutions. And the assessment should include as well the researchers in these institutions, not that just only the admin in the institution. Thanks.
You are silenced, Elizabeth.
Anna Lucía next.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I think that the most important thing is that what we're doing here, which is networking. And that is one of the most powerful tools that we have as scientists, as women, and also as teachers, as professors, is to spread the word, actually. So I think that until we understand that also science and academia are power places that have to be taken by women, as we have always done since feminism started, maybe it's time that we start to take those places instead of asking permission to be in them. So I think that, and that it's accomplished by actually the networks, the international networks, the sharing of experiences, the knowledge that we have, and to understand that as we are growing in numbers, as you were saying, 60%, 55%, 80% in some countries where women are taking more confidence in studying hard sciences, then it means that we are more. So we should have the opportunity to lead the science instead of asking permission to have the control of these spaces. And the other thing that I think is very important is to recognize that academia and science are still very male-dominated spaces, but also very violent spaces in the places of egos, or how power is managed in the name of science. So wherever there's money flowing, wherever there's power, there's going to be a difference, and there's going to be our hierarchical kind of management. So I would say that networking is like, and talking to each other and recognizing and empowering ourselves through our work, it would be one of the main things. And as Malala would say, it's very important that women get educated. That is one of the main rights that we have. And the other one is to have a free violence life at all times. Your microphone is off again.
It's the controller. He tries to stop me talking. Okay. Edna, could you give us your last thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with my peer panelists. I agree that it has to be an implementation. It has to be action taken in what everything is said in the concepts. It has to be an action, and it has to be implementation. Definitely to have a continuity of this and to be able to advance. Otherwise, it's going to stay in this state. And I would like to make a call to the scientists, that the ones that are gathering the information, the ones that are collecting data, to have to apply the rigorosity of the science, to ask the questions, to dig deep in the understanding of how sex and gender really impact the outcomes of and the health of the public health. And as well, not only that, we as regulatory agencies or decision-making agencies, we wait until the scientists take the actions. We need as well to move into the regulations, into the policies, to be able to drive them into the compliance of these implementations, with at the end of the day, the road is going to be to mitigate the effects in our population. So, and as well to the people that are watching us here, that the people that are in the field, that to always have these HBI lenses, to ask the questions, to report when you see that there are inequalities, to see that there are injustices, there is lack of ethic in the designs of the experiments, in the protocols in the universities, to speak up. So it is important for us as a community, as a population, to educate ourselves, to understand, but as well to give feedback of what is working, what is not working, because that at the end of the day, that's how we're gonna grow, how we're gonna improve in this process, from the input from the different people, including our population, including our most vulnerable people and communities. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much to my panel. Excellent panel. I'm so glad I have met you. Now I know you. I can find you for the next Gender Summit, because you have been such a wonderful input and points of views. I thank all our audience that we can't see, but we can sort of guess what they are concerned about, because we keep on getting messages in the chat. So thank you, Tonya and Oz, to have creating this session. It was really very much appreciated.
Thank you, all of you. Really, we have so enjoyed listening to you all, and you've been addressing questions again that are relevant to all of our listeners, I imagine, today. And so good to hear from different perspectives, different countries, but also very nice to have this feedback around health and policy. I think it's made it a very coherent discussion. So thank you, Elizabeth, for moderating so well, and thank you all the panelists for your wonderful contributions. And I expect you'll get lots of follow-up from members out there. There's been lots of comments coming in. We haven't had a chance to read them all to you, but Erin does always send comments to all the panelists, so you can read them at your leisure and follow up with people if you'd like to. Sorry if we haven't mentioned your comments during this time. There are always many, and we just can't manage everything. So thanks again very much. This was our final panel discussion of this mega Jamboree conference, which should actually be called a science festival rather than a conference, I think, at this point. And really, we've enjoyed it very much. So thank you, all of you, very much for your contributions. So I'm just going to wrap up and let you know what's happening over the next couple of days. See you all.